right. Hello, lovely ladies. How are you?
Hello. Good. How are you?
Hi.
Good. This is the first time we're having three people on, so I'm very excited for this. Angie, this is my lovely friend Melissa. Melissa, this is my lovely friend Angie.
Hi.
Hi. It's so nice to
Oh,
meet you. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
alrighty. So we start off every conversation with kind of like three quick little things. We do our peaches and pits, which are the highs and lows of our day. We tell a Spitfire story about our kids, and then we do a little partner praise thing.
Okay.
So Angie, you want to go first with peaches and pits?
Yeah. So, my pits is that yesterday I got a brand new medication and it kind of kicked my butt. But the peaches of that is I don't know what happened in the universe, but my doctor ordered a new medication Monday morning. It was pre-auth approved on Tuesday, and I was in for my infusion on Wednesday, which that literally never
That like
happened.
never happens.
Like, I
Yay.
didn't have to make any angry phone calls and plead my case or anything. And it was great. And I'm feeling good today. And I'm hoping that once I get my second loading dose, I'll be good to go from an arthritis standpoint.
That's
So, new
exciting.
Yay.
medication.
Yay.
How about yours, Caitlin?
Well, my pits are that I basically didn't sleep thanks to the chance of tornadoes last night.
Yeah.
Because for whatever reason, when it really counts, and it's actually very stormy, you can't hear the sirens very well at our house. And
Oh,
so when it is the most bizarre thing because you know that they like test those
right.
like all the time and it's fine. So I'm always afraid that I'm going to like sleep through it. And so I spent half the night checking to see what time it was to see if we were in our window. And then I spent our time in the window
Oh.
checking my phone to be like, did I miss a warning?
Oh,
So anyway, that kind of stinks. But my peaches are that between work and school pickup, I'm getting a massage. So at least I'm like
ooh,
gonna have a nice, very restorative afternoon. And
right.
Yay.
baseball practice got canceled, which probably shouldn't be a peach, but
That's a peach. That
I'm
that's
gonna
a
take that
peach.
win tonight and be like, we're
Yeah.
just gonna stay home and rest. So,
Totally.
Yay.
Melissa, what about you?
Well, we have beautiful weather here.
Mm.
Um, and so I'm just like soaking in the sun, and I've started doing calls on the porch with the sun on me. I'm
Ooh,
like, why not? Do people really care if I'm not inside? No.
No.
no, nobody
So
cares.
it feels so good. There's this warmth. It was just amazing. So I was walking this morning. It was amazing. So that was a peach. Um, Let me think. A pit? I don't think there have really been any pits today. I
That's
gotta
always
say,
good.
it's a peachy day.
It's a
Yes,
peachy
Yes.
day. We'll
it's a
take
peachy
that.
day.
We'll
Yeah,
take
Yeah.
that.
yeah.
All right, Angie, you had the Spitfire story for the
Yes.
girls this week.
So as Caitlin was trying to do all the activities without Eric being in town, she asked that I take Nora to dance, and I was like, "Yeah, sure, not a problem." It's costume week, so I knew it was going to be a short practice length, but it was going to be a little chaotic with trying to get two girls changed. And so we're sitting there. The girls are acting a fool. I'm trying to tell them to knock it off and to mind their own space. Um, and so then the dance instructor goes to like call everybody's names to come get their outfits, and Nora gets called first, and then a few other kids, and then they go Carolyn, and literally the second that word left her mouth, Nora goes, "It's Caroline," and Caroline goes, "Yeah, Caroline," but it was
I like that Caroline was less bothered
she
than
was
Nora was.
completely less bothered than Nora. Nora was pissed that
That's
they
so funny.
Get it
was.
right. Don't
Oh my
disrespect
god.
her bestie like that.
I know.
Oh,
But
that's
yeah, it
great.
was good. So it was nice to see Nora stick up for Caroline for completely arbitrary things.
That's so great.
There's so
Do you have a kid story you want to share?
Because you had told me about this part, and I thought, oh, that's fun, and I wanted it to be like of the moment. I didn't want to like plan it. So, but there was this really funny event last night. So I have three boys. They're all different ages, all very different. Actually, not different ages. Two are twins, identical twins. So that's pretty funny. I just said all different ages. One of the twins is totally different than his brother. He's very like stoic and knows everything. And for some reason, these traits are strange to me. Like, I don't come from people who are fairly stoic or know everything. So I'm always just curious about, like, who is this kid? So last night, this is part of my partner praise. My husband has decided he doesn't cook at all. We're 43. He's decided he's going to take cooking lessons from me with one child
Aw.
a week. So, like, it'll rotate who his
Mm.
cooking partner is, so they can learn how to cook. So it's Alexander the Stoic's turn. And we decide we're going to make like turkey meatballs. And so we go through the whole process, we mix everything, we make the meatballs. And so I'm complimenting him. We sit down, it's delicious. I'm saying, this is a great meal. You did this. Like, you and Dad did this. And he says, well, I already knew how to do it. And I said, you did? I mean, but you've never actually cooked with me and you've never done this. He said, I know, but I just know. I just knew how to do it already. It's like, okay, so you don't want me to praise you for having actually physically done it this time? No, I don't need that. I mean, I already know how to do everything. Like, okay, good luck with
Okay.
that, my friend.
Yeah.
Good luck with that.
That sounds
Oh
like Caroline
boy.
and Nora.
It
Yeah, I knew how to
does.
do this.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But
Yeah.
9
yeah.
times out of 10, they opt just not to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Or when it's really important, they suddenly they no longer know how to do it.
Correct. Correct. I can't walk across the kitchen floor.
Ah,
Oh
why
my
won't my
God.
shoes go on my feet?
Yes. Oh, yes. Life is hard sometimes.
It's hard. But I
Um,
love that idea.
I do too.
That's
That's really
great.
nice. We already kind of split cooking. Eric enjoys
Hmm.
cooking, so that,
Yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
split cooking too.
yeah. But that's
We
a
don't
really nice
split
like
it at
sentiment.
all. And so this has been kind of our, like, in figuring out how do we even things out. One idea is you just pay someone to cook for you, or you get all your meals delivered, which was on the table, or at
Yeah.
least some meals delivered. I was like, we could do that, or you guys could take over cooking one night.
Hmm.
I mean, I still was
Hmm.
there, right? I
Right.
had to tell them what to do, but it's nice to have the company, and it's also just nice to know that they're learning this skill that, okay, if I'm
Right.
out and, I want dinner made, like, here's a recipe. It's simple. Can you make this? And that could happen, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That is really nice.
Yeah.
Well, my partner prays. Eric is out of town this week, but I will just generally say, so he's in the military, and sometimes things in the military are not as controllable as you want them to be, and that doesn't make things easy. And I am always just very inspired by his like resilience in that aspect, because he always manages to like sort of pivot, when the answer is no, not this thing, he like is able to find something else that he really enjoys. And I just admire that, because pretty much every time I hear that story, I think, yeah, I would have just bounced by now.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
that would not be how I would choose to like have my career. So
Yeah.
that's going to be my thing. I really admire that quality about him, and that he enjoys the mission that he does. So I think that's
Mhm.
very lovely to see.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's great.
What about you?
Jesse's was his, so he's a business analyst, and one of the reports that he's been asked to put together lately is just like not really possible. It's like one of those things where like the people on the top don't understand.
Hmm.
And so he's like, I literally can't. Like, there's no way to do it. And so it's been a point of frustration for him and then his team over the last several weeks, really, trying to figure out how to get this information in a presentable way that is sustainable, um, to him and his team's workflow. And and that makes him very crappy. But he's been really good here lately when he's having like a moment. He's like, you know what? I'm not angry at you or the kids. I'm really frustrated at work and I'm sorry for being crabby. He's like taking responsibility for like getting emotionally charged from work and then bringing that home. He works from home, so it's hard to kind of draw that fine
Yeah.
line with because generally these outbursts happen around 5:30, which weird when you're off at
Right.
home.
Everyone's at the end of their day.
Yeah, yeah. And so he's just been really great here recently, like just kind of taking some accountability to that and saying, you know what, like this isn't, I'm really not that upset that that accidentally got spilled. Like I'm just really frustrated at work. So being able to appreciate, I really appreciate him having the ability to apologize not only to me, but to the kids too, and set that good example for them.
That's
That's
very
great.
nice. I love
Yeah.
seeing that.
I know.
Alrighty, so we're gonna jump in today. I'm gonna let Melissa kind of like tell a little bit about herself and what she does. But I have been working with Melissa as a mindset and energy coach for almost a year now, probably coming
Yeah.
up this summer.
Yeah.
And she was kind of the one through my work that sort of like inspired this path that I'm on, and then like subsequently was like, Angie, you should come with me. um this is it. So Melissa, why don't you talk a little bit about what you do, and then I will kind of like give context about what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah. So just so you know, this is my least favorite thing ever is talking about me. But I think we all at some point feel that way. Like, no, let's talk about something else. Um, and thank you for that really nice intro. Really, what I help people do is find more joy. That's a very simplistic answer. But I think it comes down to wearing a different lens. It's like glasses, and if you have dark colored glasses, everything you see is going to be filtered through that color. It's going to look dark. And if you just put on completely different colored lenses, everything looks different.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the idea is can we just switch everything, right? Change out the lens so everything looks different. And the process of that, part of it is understanding the role our body plays in that and how we perceive our world, and then just our thoughts. And I think the part that excites me the most is when you realize how much power and agency you have over the thoughts that you think. One of my favorite quotes is, don't believe everything you think. And I think we take for granted, like, I thought it's true. This is how I think. But really, that's just from a whole bunch of other inputs, and you don't have to think that way. And when you realize that you have power over how you can react, how you can perceive a situation, how you can see yourself, all of it, you're like, I don't have to see everything this way.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really what I do. I do it one-on-one. I have a group that I lead, retreats, a book that came out, a new podcast. So all those things are really just helping people feel power over how they feel and feel like they can change that.
Mm-hmm. So that is like a perfect explanation of why we asked her here today, because this is something that I think, like, as we think about the mental load that so many times like moms are struggling with, it really kind of like feeds in. And we talked about this quite a bit in our first episode about how it ends up feeling like we are kind of misaligned personally. Sometimes it makes us feel misaligned professionally. It kind of like affects all these areas of our lives. And what I kind of found to be really helpful, and what I think people are looking for, are really like, what can I do immediately? Like, it's nice to talk about big picture and like recognize that there's a lot of things that need to change, but also like, I need to do something now to help make myself feel better. And I think one of the things that was really like, um, a big revelation for me was that it doesn't necessarily have to start like it can start with me. It can be inside work. And then I can start to bring in my husband and my kids and things like that. But really, until like I was clear on what I needed to do or wanted to do, I think wanted to do was the bigger part of that picture of kind of like the excavation process. Um, it was really difficult to like convey that to my husband or my kids, right? It really just came out as like angry verbal vomit
It's
about whatever was
rage.
in front of me.
Rage is how we
Yeah.
generally do that.
Yeah, and then what happens is like everyone shuts down, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're talking and it's like Charlie Brown's teacher.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I think the best thing to start with is don't talk as much. Like sometimes we have to really stop talking as
Yeah.
much because what's happening is we're getting increasingly more frustrated that nobody understands or is listening. And it's like setting us off even more. And so we have to step away a little bit and find some quiet time, and we can go over what that looks like and some tools. But it definitely begins with mom stepping away, finding a little bit of balance,
Mm-hmm.
and then coming back in and having some conversations. And I think another piece of this is it's all free. Like
Yeah.
what that looks like doesn't have to be, well, I'm going to schedule this 5-day silent retreat or, like all of that. I'm going to do
That
this
sounds
like
But can I
lovely.
get a 5-day silent
you
retreat? Because that
can.
sounds delightful.
You can do that. However, you don't have to, right? Everything
Yeah.
we really need is at our disposal. And so we have access to everything. It's just about prioritizing some of that time and stepping back. And what does that look like in order to kind of reset the balance?
Yeah. So that's kind of where you and I started in our journey together. And I think like, do you, sorry, I just thought about like, how do I frame this up right now?
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the biggest things that I feel like you kind of talk about often is not like thinking your way out of a
Mm-hmm.
problem. And that was kind of one of the biggest steps I feel like I took. That's where I felt like everything kind of started to change. Do you want to walk us through like what that looks like, what that process kind of entails?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things I like to say is the problem and the solution don't live in the same zip code. And that's just something to stick on a post-it and have around because as well educated, you know, intelligent, right, literate women, we're used to solving everything and pro con listing it out. And like, if I think hard enough, I'll get the answer. And we go down rabbit holes and
Hmm.
it's like, there's like steam coming out, right? Our gears are turning that hard and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I practice this all the time. The reason I know it doesn't work is I tried it for so long. That's how I know it doesn't work. So knowing that when you're really stuck in the problem, thinking more about it, talking more about it is not going to offer the solution. And I think it's about energy. I mean, that's my perspective. You can kind of see it through different lenses, but for me, it's about energy. The solution's over here, and you're stuck in this problem. And it's like the guidance and the answers and this aha moment of this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. This is the answer is like totally unavailable to you. It's like a radio frequency, right? You're just on the wrong channel.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you actually do that? How do you quiet down your thoughts and say, all right, I'm going to stop? Well, it takes a lot of practice. It's just practice. It's just practice. And in the beginning, it's just realizing, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm like, okay, all right, I'm trying to think my way out. So what do? I mean, I'm a big proponent of meditation. I'm a big proponent of, hugging your dog, of going outside, putting your feet in the grass, putting cold water on your wrists, humming, right? There's all sorts of ways to kind of shift yourself into a place where you don't feel like you're stuck or you can't breathe or you're becoming undone. And once you start to lighten, there'll be some guidance, some answer that starts to come in, and you come up a little more and a little more, and it's incremental. So that's a long-winded answer, but the realization that when you're thinking so hard, you're not going to get to the solution, I think is an important one for us to, resonate with and play around with.
Mm.
Yeah, I feel like thinking feels actionable, but in that
Mm-hmm.
scenario, it's not. And so you feel like you're doing the right thing by thinking about it. And like, I know my own self, I am action item totally driven. And so that thinking gives me kind of that like rebound of like, yes, you're doing something about it because you're thinking about it, but you're just spinning your wheels at that point.
Yeah. And usually getting further away from it because you're either thinking about how the problem started and you're getting angrier, or you're going into future tripping with worry and overwhelm, right? There's like two ends here. We either think about the past and we kind of get pissed off, or we think about the future and we're worrying and worrying. And like neither one of them is a good place to be, right?
Right.
Mhm. Yeah. I think Angie and I have in common that we are like warriors of stuff and
Mm-hmm.
things.
Yeah.
So I think I think for me, that's kind of been like the biggest change is like not worrying through and like, and also not thinking through. I think we're also both very similar in that regard where we're going to take some action here
Yeah.
and we're going to think about lots of things.
Yeah.
And
We're
it
going to get shit
often,
done.
yeah, it
Right.
often backfires. The other thing
Right.
too that I started doing that was really helpful when I needed to kind of get out of this space was like before I could even really articulate what I wanted. And this is sort of how I came to this because I feel like it was really hard for Eric and I to get on the same page about like how do things need to change when I couldn't even really explain or articulate well, like why I wanted them to change. Like there was sort of like
Mm-hmm.
the obvious like I am angry and I am like constantly moving and I feel like you are constantly relaxing, which of course is like not the truth, but that's the way it
Right.
looked to me, you know? And so it really needed to like identify what was really important. Like what were my priorities and then to be able to have that conversation and say like, "Hey, this is why I find it really frustrating when I am in motion from the time I open my eyes until I go to sleep, like, yes, it's physically and mentally exhausting, but like the bigger picture is that it's leaving me feel really kind of like unfulfilled. I'm not thinking about or doing anything aside from like managing our lives. And that
Mm-hmm.
even though it is a great privilege to me to be a mom and to be your partner, that's like not my whole identity. It's not, I don't want to just like get to retirement age and be like, cool.
Yeah.
I did some things,
Yeah.
I think.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Think.
There's this amazing book I recently started reading. It's a little bit dense and like the language is very flowery. So when I read a book like this, it's called The Book of Awakening. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's over 20 years old. But when I read a book like this, it's so poetically written that I'm like embarrassed that I wrote a book. I'm like, it's not even in the same like category. Like one would be in the children's section and what but that's not fair. But it's so beautiful. And one of the things the author Mark Nepo writes is he's talking about this. What you're saying is we go through all these motions and we're so busy, and the conversation we really want to be having is, how do we remember who we really are? Right? Like, why are we here? Like, what am I meant to do? This purpose that lights us up. And sometimes it's getting over the shame and embarrassment that that's not just my kids.
Mm.
Like, yeah, I do love them, but that's not actually what I was put on this earth to do. I got to be honest with you. It's part of it, but not the only part of it. So he writes, I mean, oh my gosh, the writing is just, you got to read it. He writes, how do we remember who we really are? He says, slowness remembers and hurry forgets. Softness remembers and hardness forgets. Surrender remembers and fear forgets. And that resonates with me a lot, because I do notice that when I slow down and I'm just a little softer to myself, to my kids, to my partner, to everyone, my mother, and I just let some of it go. I don't try to like have my, grip the wheel with everything and try to force everything my way. And I just let the wheel go a little bit. I have this feeling of, this is where I'm meant to be, right? It's a lightness. And so I keep remembering that, because, we're all driven and we're all trying to build different things. And yet somehow we have to balance that drive with, it's okay. I can take my hands off the wheel a little bit.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that was like probably the biggest and hardest lesson I think for me to learn, was to just be like, cool, I can be a little bit chill about life instead of being so high strung about it.
It's hard.
It is
It's hard to
hard.
let it go.
It is. One of my favorite ways that I kind of started doing this was through, and this was like, this whole conversation is going to be things Melissa told me to do. Okay. So there's no, yeah, there's like, Melissa's not going to be surprised by any of these things, because it's literally like,
I'm like, ooh, I got my pencil ready.
no, this is just your words, me saying them back. But I started doing this morning ritual, and that was probably, it is like now one of my most favorite things to do. And it's kind of become, I've gotten to the point where it can be like, it's much more fluid than it used to be. Like I used to, so her suggestion was like, instead of getting up in the morning and like the first thing that you're doing being starting on everybody else's stuff for the day, like what if you just had some quiet time where you did something that like you enjoyed, not anything like reading, but really just like relaxing. And it's like mind-blowing to think about starting your day doing like
Nothing.
I was like, what is this concept? I don't understand. And so I started getting up, and I mean, it was in the summertime, so it was like warm out and the sun came up a lot earlier. And so I'd sit on my front porch with a cup of tea and just like literally watch the sun come up. And it was maybe like 15 minutes, but it changed like the whole energy of my day, because I was like, oh, I have like poured into my own cup. I have done something like I haven't overstimulated myself. I wasn't like reading or creating or listening to a podcast, or those are all things I love doing. But like by intentionally sort of like stripping out the stimulation and just like being still and quiet, I was like, wow, this is a drastically different way for me to start my day.
I'm a huge proponent of that. I do a very similar thing where I wake up early and drink a cup of coffee. And even my kids know. Charlotte, just the other day, my oldest wanted to wake up early and she goes, "Can you wake me up after your second cup of coffee?" Because she knows that the first one is 100% sacred.
Yeah, and I think it's also great that you're teaching them
Yeah.
Hmm.
like that you carve out this time for yourself. I think that's great. I mean, one of my boys is also an early bird, and he wanted me to wake him up early to like do some things in the morning, and I bought him this musical alarm clock. So it's not like horrible and blaring, but it's light music, and he sets it, and I said, "Look, you have to set it because when you want to wake up is in the middle of my meditation time, and it's not negotiable, right? It's just
Hmm.
not negotiable. There's nothing I can do, buddy." So he's like, "Okay, I'll do the alarm clock," and that works.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah, it's just like setting that sort of like boundary for yourself. And then that's where through that like quiet time, I felt like I was really able to be like, it sort of just like naturally kind of came into me where I was like, or occurred to me, where I was like, oh, these are the things that are really important to me. And so now I can go back to Eric and I can say, like, here's what's bothering me about our current setup. And like, here's why it bothers me. Like
Hmm.
it's really important, as I was sitting there and I'm just like listening to the nature sounds and the highway, but listening often
Kind of
the
like the
distance.
ocean. That can
Oh,
be
Yeah,
super.
yeah.
oceany.
Yeah.
Yes. I like that spin. That's how I'm going to think of it from now on. I've secretly got beachfront property.
Yes.
Um, but as I'm listening to like sort of our neighborhood wake up and I'm like watching, the colors change in the sky, which is like one of my favorite
Hmm.
things to like look at and watch in nature, it occurred to me that I was like, oh, I really like, I feel in this moment, I have like so much creativity. I don't even know about what. I just have so much creativity. And then I was able to recognize like having time in my day to be creative, whether it's
Hmm.
like art projects with the kids or my own projects or whatever, it was really important to me. And so actually, like the mental load was keeping me from blocking off even just a small amount of time to do that. And that was sort of it wasn't so much that I was annoyed that I was doing all of those things. I mean, certainly
Hmm.
I want help, but the bigger issue was, hey, I'm not getting this. And that is really important to me as a person. Like when I get this creative time, everybody here gets a better
Yeah,
version of mom than
exactly.
like
Yeah.
when I'm just like, oh, cool. I would love to remake that peanut butter and jelly sandwich because you fed it to the dog. Of course. Let me do that
That
again.
is that is
Right.
why I exist.
Yes, that's my sole purpose is to remake your snacks after you angrily feed them to the dog and realize you still do want them. That's a 3-year-old problem.
That's so funny.
But it's so true. When we don't have time to fill our own cups, then we're constantly running on fumes, and that's not fair really to anybody at the end of the day, but especially to ourselves.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I think it's confusing. Like, how do we fill our cup? I think we have some ideas of what that looks like.
Hmm.
But sometimes that's like, oh, I'll meet up with friends, or I'll go to a yoga class, or I'll get a massage, which is could be great. But sometimes we have to get a little more creative. It's really being more alone,
Hmm.
and kind of doing some exercises at home, some mental exercises at home, just in quiet alone. Because I think there's a time for doing all those things, but I think a lot of it is enjoying yourself and being alone and your thoughts.
Hmm.
I don't want the filling of your cup to be more running from you.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
there's a vulnerability in being with yourself, and it's hard
Hmm.
to, I mean, I know like as Jesse and I decided to we were done having kids, like I was in my early 30s, and I was just like, well, shit, like I've been pregnant breastfeeding for 10 years now. What do I? what do you mean? Like, what do I do now with myself?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think moms in particular have this point in in the process of their lives where they get to like almost rediscover themselves a little bit. And
Mhm.
who I am at 35 is vastly different than 25. And so being able to be vulnerable with yourself and get to kind of know yourself again, I think is a really cool aspect and takes some like genuine effort and consciousness to be there with yourself and your own thoughts.
Mm-hmm. And it looks different than like self-care,
Yes.
right? Because
Yes.
that's what I think this gets pigeonholed into sometimes is like, oh, if you want to like, lighten your load a little bit, just um, take better care of yourself. Like do some self-care activities, like check out for a day and don't do the
Right.
stuff and the things that have to get done. But I feel like as we all
Yeah.
know, it's like on Mother's Day when like your husband and your kids are like, "Don't do anything," right? Just sit down and relax, mom, and they insist the whole day, and so you do. Meanwhile, you're just sort of like looking around and you're like, "Okay, but tomorrow we still have
Yeah.
to go to school and
Yeah.
none of
I
you
mean,
have
inevitably
clean clothes."
we have lives and inevitably life can't stop. And so like how
Yeah.
do we find this balance of how can we just I'm having a hard time articulating it, but we can't just take a break. It's not a break. It's like a
Yeah.
whole like you said, a lens and
Yeah.
Yeah.
how we can be more efficient and better at it.
Yeah, and I
Yeah. And not, I think that idea of taking a break, it's funny. It's like, okay, let me get out of my life for a little bit. But then you still come back to it.
yeah.
Right.
You're still coming back to it. So really the question is, how do I make it so that I wake up and I in my life, my everyday life, whether it's making a second peanut butter and jelly sandwich, one for the dog and one for the 3-year-old, like feels funny and feels enjoyable and something you want to do, and you're not kind of like holding your breath through the whole thing. I mean,
Mhm.
we have to stop holding our breath until we get this day off or time away. We
Mhm.
that's just not tenable.
Yeah, and I think when we just are sort of like holding our breath, waiting for that moment, like that's when we snap. And that's when I feel like the most unappreciated by everybody in my household. Whereas when I think about and I plan for, here is some time for me to like start my day in a way that I want to start it, it feels like I mean, like I am setting the tone for my day. I'm not letting my to-do list
Yeah.
set the tone for my day, because when I do that, and there's still mornings where like it happens, it's inevitable, and there's a definite noticeable shift in the energy between those days and the days when I'm like, oh, I got up, I maybe stretched a little,
Hmm.
I did whatever, sat on the porch, or I sat and I meditated. And so I think understanding like what your priorities are and then making sure that you build in time, and it is non-negotiable. I
Yes.
think at one point my husband was like, "Oh, I should get up and join you." And I was like, "You really shouldn't."
No. It's not a partner
Absolutely
work.
not.
Sorry. It's not for us to do together. Yeah.
Yep, you are
Yeah.
uninvited to this party.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's another piece, Angie, you brought up a great point that sometimes it's scary for us or uncomfortable to
Mm,
be alone because really our thoughts do tend towards the negative. And so having quiet alone time almost feels like an invitation for our mind to kind of like either go down rabbit holes or kind of go through these spinning cycles of worry. And um, so I think another piece to this is setting aside the time and then really training your mind to what it's going to think about and what you're going to focus on. And sometimes I like the analogy of a lot of our problems or worry or concerns is like the pink and purple elephant in the room. And you can't take your eyes away from it. I mean, come on, it's like this massive pink and purple elephant. And only when you're like, okay, I know you're there, but I'm looking over here and I see some flowers, they're nice. And I see some chocolate, that's nice. And I see it's it's really challenging for us to do that, but it's saying, look, everything that I'm thinking about right now feels like it's stolen my attention, like I have no choice but to think it. It's this pink and purple elephant, but you do, and it's coming over here. So some of the things that I help clients with or I talk about are, okay, name 5 things that you love right now. Like, don't give me that I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for my kids' health. I'm grateful, like I know you are. I know you're not a terrible person and that you are grateful for your health and your kids' health. But
Right.
you're also like really loving that cup of coffee, right? Or the cup of tea, and you're loving seeing the birds and you love seeing the sun rise. And you love that you just got these really amazing slippers and they're like soft and warm and your toes feel good in them. And I love that a good friend gave me a cup with my name on it. Like, I'm thrilled to drink from a monogram cup. I'm like, yay, every time I drink from it. Like, these are really small things. Um, finding the best pair of shoes, when you get your kids signed up for summer camp and you're like, yes, right? I figured it out. The puzzle of the summer, I figured it out. Like, it's appreciating, training your brain away from the pink and purple elephant to these
Mhm.
5 things. And they can be really dumb. Usually, one of my top 5 is Instacart. And I feel like terrible saying that. But I cannot, when it tells me that I've saved like 1,000 hours, I'm like, oh my God, I saved 1,000 hours. Like, I feel that. Like, I'm so grateful that someone is getting all my groceries and bringing
Yep.
them to my door. It never is lost on me. I am so, so appreciative. Right. But it's just saying, okay, what's my top 5 right now?
Mhm. Mhm. I I do that all the time. I feel like since now that I have like trained myself, it's like this cup is my absolute like favorite cup, and literally every time I look at it, it like makes me very happy.
Yeah.
I think about the beach,
Yeah. You have
and
the highway beach
I
sounds.
do
Now
have
you have the cup.
You're basically there, Caitlin. I'm not
I'm
even
You're
sure why
basically
you're
basically
spending your
there.
money
I
on
should just
Instacart.
refund my beach house vacation
Yes.
because it turns out I already
You're
live at
there.
one.
You're already there.
But it is like taking the time to be like, I'm going to deliberately like look for something else, then it becomes so much more second nature. Like, I find myself like when I'm driving and stuff like that, even just to pick up the kids, I'll be like, oh my gosh, I noticed like the flowers on the tree on the
Mhm.
corner. And like every time I drive by them now, I notice them. And it just makes me smile a little bit. And
Yeah.
like the more I notice those moments throughout the day, the more I was also able to say, like, oh, so my whole day isn't just focused on these other people. Like, I do actually enjoy some things for myself, as it
Yeah.
turns out.
I feel like it's training yourself to have intentional thoughts instead of intrusive thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah,
that
and
phrase.
it's training. It is. So the 3 steps I say, it's awareness, practice, and compassion, and then repeat. Because as much as you practice the new thoughts, the old ones pop in, right? Because we've been on that train for, 40 years, for me at least. And so I have to be really nice to myself too when I don't change the thought and I go down the rabbit hole, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly what it is. It's practice and practice and practice and practice.
The other way that I really loved learning how to do this, that it was so simple, I had never thought of doing it. And once Melissa was like, you should try this, I was like, how did I not think of this myself? But it was like in the in between activities, I was always like, oh, I'm done with work and I'm done with the gym. And so now I'm like on to pick up the kids. And then once I pick them up, I got this and this and this and this and this and this. And so then by the time I walked into daycare to pick them up, I was like, let's go, people. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
because clearly we have 500 things we have to do tonight and they're all for you. So like, I don't know why you're melting down right now, except Willa. Willa is like the most joyful
She really is the most joyful.
little girl when you pick her up.
My
Yeah,
heart is so happy when she sees me and she goes, "Hi."
I know.
Oh.
She really does like, she just exudes joy.
Yeah.
And so one day Melissa was like, well, why don't you turn the radio off when you're driving? Like, so then as you are going, and again, it was like another moment to just like, I could be thinking about what I needed to do, but I think part of, and what I didn't realize before, part of what made the mental load for me feel so overwhelming was like the constant noise. Like
Hmm.
my kids are a wall of noise that literally never stops. And then there's like the TV and there's work stuff and there's notifications and there's
Hmm.
all of this like environmental stimulation. And so she was like, well, turn your radio off when you leave daycare so that as you're driving to work, you can just focus on being like really intentional about what you're going to get done in your work day. And it made me feel really like 10 times more productive. And then like on the way to pick the kids up, like I can be thinking about what we need to do, but it gives me like, it's like this quiet time to be like, okay, now I am like mentally and emotionally prepared
Yeah.
for
To drag Nora out of daycare.
to drag Nora out of daycare. Every day, we're going to have a meltdown about why our things don't fit in our backpack and why I have to carry so much stuff, even though I'm the one who packed it that morning. And now I'm mentally prepared to be like, okay, let's repack our bag calmly. And now that our backpack is full, we only have one thing to walk out with.
Yeah. I think that's great. The idea of just curating your environment.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that's another thing. Being, you mentioned Angie just being really intentional. You don't have to, people are, you wouldn't believe how many times I get on a call and there's like the news blaring in the background. I'm like, that would drive me insane.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like everyone's so conditioned to it,
Hmm.
and I'm not like totally against social media. That's fine, but I think it's um if we want to reclaim our mind and our time, it's thinking about like everything that we just allow to kind of surround us in every way, all the noise, all the talking, all the people. And how do we really think about like, no, I got to protect me a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. I love this idea of curating our environment because
Hmm.
I think sometimes part of like what feels so insurmountable about this is that like a lot of it is non-negotiable. It's non-negotiable that I feed my kids dinner.
Right.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it turns out that they do require that daily.
Right. Yeah.
And, it's non negotiable that like we go to bed at a reasonable time. Like we might be able to be flexible, 30 minutes one way or the other, but like I can't just let you stay up until 11 o'clock at
Right.
night and then wake you
Right.
up for school the next morning. Like
At my house, it's pants. The pants thing is the non-negotiable, and it's
it's very
We're
difficult to get on
going to
board
wear
with.
pants.
so hard.
We just are.
We are wearing
Yeah.
pants today. Is that Caroline?
Oh, always. You know. I mean, she was just like, just call me out of school. Because my argument back was, you have to go to school and you have to wear pants to school. And she was like, call me out of school.
Call me out of school. I will take
And I'm like,
challenge accepted.
no.
Turns out it's non-negotiable that you go to school as
School
well.
is also non-negotiable. And
Yeah, I
mommy
tell
goes to
my kids
jail.
sometimes about school. I'm like, they're going to arrest me if you just miss a bunch
Yeah.
of school. Like I actually get arrested. And
Yeah.
I think for a moment they thought about that. Like, would that be so bad? like, like,
Do
is that
I?
really bad? I'm like, uh,
I might was this pre-cooking? Because then I feel like they weren't
yeah,
laying that
I know
totally out.
that was
Like,
it. It was like, well, we get takeout, you know.
there are ways to solve that. It's
Right.
fine. Yeah. So this idea of like kind of curating and saying like here's what the non-negotiables are, but then everything else like outside of that does not have to get done.
Mhm.
Like I think once I kind of stopped putting the non-negotiable label on every single aspect of my day, there were things that I was like, okay, if the laundry sits in the laundry basket unfolded for another day, it might annoy me. I could let
Mhm.
it annoy me, or I could just be like, that's not my priority today.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, like it's really just ultimately it wasn't about deciding like I guess simplifying it to non-negotiable and not is maybe a little bit too like oversimplifying it, but it was more about like how does this make me feel? Like
Mhm.
is the laundry being unfolded going to annoy me to the point where I can't like enjoy the rest of my day? Or is it more important to me to like play outside and
Mhm.
do those things than it is to like fold the laundry? And some days the laundry is more important.
Hmm.
Sometimes
Yeah.
I look at my kids and I go, no, I can't come outside and draw right now because I do need to like fold these clothes. I can't physically make it to my bed anymore. So
Yeah.
we just like I am
Right.
going to fold these clothes while you go play with chalk. And I hope you enjoy that.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So I think we could go on forever about how we could do this, but curating our environment and really getting clear on what our priorities are so we can have the conversations and then we can build in ways to really like curate that environment. It's such a softer approach, I think, than like, and maybe this is surprising to people listening. I think some people are going to be like, well, I wanted a step by step guide. I wanted
Mhm.
you to tell me
I
10
thought
things.
this was the manual.
I thought this was the manual. I thought you were solving the problem and I would leave today and
Mhm.
like I'd have a checklist of things to do. But I think this like softer approach allows you to really just tailor it and approach it with like some individuality and make it really kind of
Mhm.
yours to own.
Well, that can be your checklist. Your checklist is find intentional time to be alone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There. There's your
Yeah.
action item.
There you
That's your
go.
action item. And I think one of the things you said, Caitlin, that is really the most critical part of all of this is really radically prioritizing how you feel.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's such a big part of this is we so often feel like our needs are like lowest on the totem pole. And so we never even ask the question, how do I feel? Do I like this? Right? It's just like, well, I have to do all this. And so we're not really paying attention to how we feel or prioritizing how we feel. And that's the only thing that's important.
Mm-hmm. And I think that gets lost a lot.
Yeah.
I think as moms, we are trained to not really care how we feel,
Mm-hmm.
or if we do, to be like, yeah, but like the way that my household feels is more important.
Hmm.
And so I think like recognizing, and that's why it goes beyond like a massage or brunch with your friends. It's understanding and making space for the way that you feel and then curating your environment around that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. Melissa, where can people find you if they want to connect and learn more?
Well, I have a podcast that I'd love people to check out. It's like 5 minutes, which for me is just about what I can handle in a. So I recorded my own podcast to my own preference, which is like that's all I can handle. So the podcast is The Path to Joy, and I have a book with the same name. So go check it out. You can check it out any app on Amazon, all of that.
Thank
Very cool.
you. Thank you for joining us today. We really
You're
appreciate it.
Yes.
welcome.
Thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you for inviting me.
Bye, ladies. Have a great
Bye.
afternoon.
You too.